This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
Hi, I'm Frank. I've been a builder for 40 years. I noticed a problem, and that problem is dire. That inspired me to write a book, which is titled Decarbonize the World. I wrote it also because there is hope. I believe the future is bright. I believe a simple idea like Iceman can save the world. How? By harnessing the positive market forces of competitive advantage, by introducing an actionable solution and model for reducing the world's carbon footprint, thereby preserving our planet and our ability to survive, all while benefiting businesses and the economy. Many organizations, corporations, and individuals today are setting goals to adopt renewable energy and also become carbon neutral. In this podcast, I wish to further discover the how. How are they attaining these goals? How are they becoming carbon neutral? How are these initiatives impacting their business? How are they addressing the challenges and difficulties? How are their constituents or clients responding to their achievements? My very first guest is Heidi Heitkamp, the former U.S. Senator of the great state of North Dakota. Heidi is currently heading up the Bipartisan Policy Center's Farm and Forest Carbon Solutions Task Force. Senator Heitkamp, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an honor to have you. You know, we don't hear much about bipartisanship, but you're co-chairing a task force with Georgia Republican Saxby Chambliss. You both served on the Senate Agricultural, Forestry, and Nutrition Committee. Talk to me about your relationship and the project you two are spearheading.
Well, you know, the bipartisanship that you're going to see is really issue related. By that, I mean, when you look at the Farm Bill and you look at how bipartisan the Farm Bill has been, the only conflict we have in the Farm Bill tends to be regional. You know, whether the peanut farmers are getting more than the wheat farmers, or, you know, the programs are working for soybeans and not for cotton. You know, these are the questions that we wrestle with in the Ag Committee. And so those of us who have served have had an opportunity to work with our colleagues on the other side, whether it's on biofuels or whether it's on making sure that we have food security and making sure that our food supply is secure. It was a joy to be on that committee, and Saxby is just one of my favorite people. You know, the only conflict Saxby and I have ever had was between peanuts and wheat. So we're all good.
Okay. So tell me more about this Farm and Forest Carbon Solutions Task Force.
Well, you know, this project started out as the brainchild of the leadership at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who was looking across the board and said, where can we find some level of consensus on climate and on climate solutions? Agriculture is about 10 to 15% of CO2 emissions. I think that understanding that a lot of ranchers and farmers were deeply concerned that climate policy would negatively impact their bottom line have been very resistant. But over the last several years, I think most farmers and ranchers have seen the changes, whether it is new pests that have come into their crops that they've never seen before, whether it is weather patterns that are unexplainable and really have not been seen, more droughts, more heavy rains. It's just becoming more and more difficult to farm. And so I think also agriculture has come to the realization that over in North Dakota's case, 90% of our land mass is engaged in production agriculture. There's a real opportunity for carbon to become a commodity that can, in fact, be lucrative for ranchers and farmers. And so looking at these things, we started out with one simple rule, do no harm. It is tough enough on ranches and farms to make the bottom line and make things work. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we decided we would be doing with farm groups, with farmers and ranchers, and not to them. And so this was a wonderful opportunity to bring soil scientists to the table, bring forestry to the table, bring agriculture to the table, and talk about how we can be part of the climate solution. It resulted in our policy recommendations being issued the 1st of February. We really focused on 6 themes. One was expanding existing conservation programs. And I want to let people know that where these have climate ramifications, they also are great for soil conservation, for water conservation. These are really important programs as we look at that great natural resource of soil that we have and making sure that that is preserved for the next generation of farmers and ranchers. The next is addressing technical support and workforce needs. I think one of the things that we forget, because we say, okay, we're going to now move in this direction in terms of energy policy or in terms of agricultural policy, we need workforce. We need expertise and technical assistance to help farmers adapt and adopt new policies. The third theme is strengthening voluntary carbon markets. And this is tricky. We spend a lot of time talking to what we hope will eventually be large buyers of carbon credits. And they are very concerned about reputational risk. By that, I mean, they don't want to buy junk. They don't want to just, have a fly-by-night, here's a credit, say that you're doing something on climate. They want to make sure that it is there. And this is one of the trickier components, which is making sure that if we're saying that we're sequestering CO2 in soils, that it stays in the soil, that we don't have kind of a false narrative. If we're saying we're going to plant more trees, we're not taking out trees someplace else. And there's been internationally, a lot of dialogue about carbon credits and making sure that they're real. The fourth theme is developing new finance insurance instruments. And these are tax incentives, similar to the work that I did on 45Q for industrial sequestration, assisting the impact of conservation projects on crop yields, taking a look at how we can better ensure climate-smart agriculture. The fifth theme was enhancing carbon storage and climate resiliency of farms and forest land. And, when we modernize, we are going to look at adopting an all-of-government approach to resilience, especially in the area of wildfires, which is not only bad for our forests, it's also bad for the climate. And finally, fostering farm and forest-based climate innovation. What does that look like? We don't know everything today that we need to know in order to bring agriculture to the table in a meaningful way. And we're really excited about this project. We've been invited to come and testify before the House Agriculture Committee. Saxby and I have been. And so we're very excited about advancing these initiatives because we think not only are they climate smart, they are revenue smart for farmers and ranchers.
Cool. I love your approach on what you mentioned about with the farmers understanding that. And one of the things, and both you and I have in common, is educating people that there's a financial benefit in adopting renewable energy, and it doesn't have to cost people money. It actually, they can have that financial benefit. We were one of the first builders in the country that certified carbon neutral as a business. And after we did our carbon mitigation, our carbon offsets was purchased from a family farm in Georgia, where they took cow manure and through anaerobic digestion converted it to methane. And then that methane was used to run generators to produce electricity for the farm. And whatever electricity they had extra, they sold back to the grid. So there was a net financial benefit to the farmer.
Yeah, and we did a lot of work with the dairy industry, and they have been early adapters, some of the larger dairies. But, your project is a great example of how we can work with maybe smaller operators to make sure that our smaller family farms are actually getting the benefit. One of the things that we heard over and over and over again is this just going to benefit the middleman, the guy who is, or the organization that is marketing these credits, as opposed to the credits going back to the farmers and ranchers and actually improving their bottom line? And that's a concern that we have, is making sure that these carbon credits are kind of farm to table, right? We can't create a whole industry of people who are making money on the backs of agriculture as they're doing the right things for climate. So we do a lot of kind of analysis, and hopefully that warning is flashing red in our report.
Great. You served as a United States Senator from North Dakota from 2013 to 2019. I'm curious, these elected officials that are climate change deniers publicly, are they so confident behind closed doors?
Yep, they are. The ones that are really... No, they really are. There's two categories. There's the people who don't believe it, who really don't believe it. And I mean, I spend a lot of time just kind of looking at them, whether it's Jim Inhofe, who recently announced his retirement from Oklahoma. There are people who don't believe that climate is a problem, that weather changes, that this is all exaggerated. This is not, oh, I'm just pandering to, a small minority of people who don't believe it. They do not believe it. And then there's a secondary category of people who believe it, but know that it's not maybe within their base, not a real popular thing to say. And what they would tell you is it's there, we need to be concerned, but it's not an emergency. It's not something we need to move heaven and earth over to kind of resolve. And then I think there's the third group, and that's the group who really want to do something on climate, but they know that there isn't an appetite within their party to do it. And, I think kind of moving forward, one of the things that I always say is you need to be in some ways agnostic about fuel. And this may not be a popular thing for your audience, but let's take natural gas. One of the reasons why we have been enormously successful in reducing CO2 emissions in this country over the last decade has been the emergence of natural gas as a fuel source for generation. I worked on a board of directors of a facility that took coal and made natural gas out of coal, and we shipped CO2 north to be basically injected in an oil field in Canada. It was the largest carbon sequestration project ever. And now we're looking at, and in your country, your home country, Norway, has been a leader on carbon capture sequestration and monitoring wells to make sure that CO2 did not come back up. And so carbon capture is what we need to look at. We need to look at all kinds of solutions that are going to move this forward. And I think, I always tell people, whether you believe it or not, probably the two most important climate bills that passed when I was in the United States Senate were really led by me. One was an exchange. We basically solidified and perfected the production tax credits for wind energy, the investment tax credits for solar, in exchange for an agreement to allow exportation of crude oil. Well, that actually drove the technologies that improved wind and solar energy. And so that stabilizing those tax credits had a lot to do with the huge transition you saw in movement on renewables. If you look at 45Q, which is really a tax credit for industrial, for folks in industry, not just in the power plant industry, but cement. 20% of all industrial emissions of CO2 comes from cement plants. There's an incredible a lot of research, especially at UCLA, on how we can embed that CO2 in cement. So we kind of recarbonize this. And so, we can't be so knee-jerk that it's all got to be this way, that we don't look at emerging opportunities and challenge industrial emitters of CO2 to come up with solutions on how they can get their industries and how they can get their processes to zero emissions. But if we say, we're never going to do that, we're going to get rid of this industry, you will miss an opportunity, it seems to me. And as you know, right now, there's a lot of focus on natural gas, given what's happening with Western Europe and their dependency on Russian natural gas. And the political knives are out, right? This is all because of carbon policy. No, it's not. You don't change energy in a year. I mean, it's just so frustrating. But on the other side, it's like, well, if we had only had more solar panels, well, guess who makes solar panels? China makes solar panels. And so you can't move this industry on a dime. You've got to be practical, and you've got to have alliances that recognize a path forward that's realistic and that is doable if we're going to meet the emergency of climate.
Great. That's a very practical approach. I look at fossil fuels, I look at it as a transition, right? So, you start with the largest emitter, and that's coal, right? You start making your changes in getting rid of or stop using coal where you can. Not that it's going to be all or nothing, right? And then you work on oil, right? So natural gas, as far as fossil fuels, is really the cleanest burning. fossil fuel. And what most people don't understand is, we support, burning methane, to run generators. That is also a natural gas, and it makes the same emissions as fossil fuel natural gas, except it's not, fossil fuel is not considered renewable, right? So in that transition that we make, I think natural gas is just from a practical standpoint, is always going to be with us.
Well, and you aren't going to get an argument from me. I also think that the natural gas industry is poised to be one of the leaders in carbon capture, one of the leaders in getting us to net zero emissions or close to net zero emissions. And
That's interesting.
If you dry up capital for investment in these new technologies, whether it's methane capture, which is a huge problem, and the natural gas industry, their first priority should be getting methane emissions under control and not wasting. If you look in western North Dakota, where we produce a lot of oil, literally the night skies are lit up by the burning of natural gas and methane. Mm-hmm. That needs to end. Number one, It's incredibly wasteful. But number two, it is wrong-headed in terms of climate policy. So there's plenty of low-hanging fruit for solving some of the early emissions problems, but then also making investments in the technologies that will stabilize our energy security, right, in Western Europe and across the world, but also meet climate goals. And people say, well, you've got to go all this way. Hey, one of the big mistakes that was made in Europe was shutting down their nuclear capacity.
Yep, that's correct.
Look at Germany right now.
Yep.
Went from 30 to 3, and now they're dependent on natural gas, 50% coming from Russia.
And they're starting back up their nuclear power plants.
Well, thank God. People who say, well, we can't have nukes, I'm like, you know what? There is a new generation. I met with MIT professors and students who were doing amazing things in this space with micro units. And, I'm just convinced that it's going to be part of our energy future. But if we knee jerk, no, we won't get where we need to go on climate.
Right.
So it's not always popular to say in climate spaces, but if we work with each entity, by that I mean each part of our economy, whether it's agriculture like we did with this report, whether it is industrial emissions of CO2, whether it's conservation, and well that right now we can create buildings that are zero emitters, right?
Right. Yep, that's what I'm doing. Yep.
Yeah. So this is the wave of the future. We need to expedite moving in that direction. But if we scare people into thinking that they have to now quadruple the amount that they're paying for energy, we will do ourselves a disservice because it will set the climate movement back.
And it won't work.
Right.
It won't work.
Right. Amen. Yeah. It will not work.
Right.
If you said we're going to tear down every building that is an emitter and we're going to do what you do, think of the cost. These are transition points, and we can expedite those transitions. We can improve conservation efforts. I thought that the president was right when he talked about weatherization. And so there's things that we can do that may not be big and flashy and, kind of get the headline on the controversy, but will actually have meaningful climate outcomes. And that's what we were focused on in this report from the Bipartisan Policy Center.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's what we're doing in our business. We are in the Hamptons the only BPI accredited contractor, which means that's Building Performance Institute, which we go into the existing inventory of homes and we do energy audits. And one of the biggest bangs for the buck in saving energy actually is stopping air infiltration into these older homes. It's an incredible amount of heat loss there. And it takes very little money to fix it. And in New York State, we have programs and incentive to help people. So they don't even pay for that energy audit. The state does. And then there's rebates and all kinds of other incentives to do that. And I think that's the correct way to approach this.
Well, and think about number one, you're going to save them in energy costs. You're going to reduce dependency on foreign energy sources, right? Because it's going to be, if we reduce our energy costs, it's going to, our energy usage without changing anything The house size is going to be the same. You don't have to downsize. And so the low-hanging fruit to me is exactly what you're talking about. And it's making sure that we have the right incentives in place, that we don't tell people what to do, but we show them how it can be done and how we can help them get it done. And that will make a huge difference.
It is the best way to approach this, and this is what I talk about in my book, because, I talk about the bottom-up approach, where in the European countries you have a top-down approach because they're social democracies, and how change happens in our country from the bottom up. And that is, I believe, in our country anyway, it works really well that way.
Well, the other thing about bottom up is it's sustainable.
Correct.
When you create a top down, then when the top changes, as we saw with the previous administration, your progress is stalled. If you want permanency, you got to bring people along. And
exactly right.
That's the problem with climate policy in a lot of ways, is you see it now, the vulnerability of people focusing on climate at a time when we are in dire straits. Europe's in dire straits on energy security. And so if you want sustainability, we need to have long-term planning, and we need to understand what's doable and what isn't doable, and how we can, in fact, achieve our goals working together and working with people, not against people.
Correct. Well, on that note, let's take a break. But coming up in the second part of my conversation with Heidi Heitkamp, the Senator talks about the role the Department of Agriculture plays in crafting effective climate change solutions.
There will be climate provisions in the next farm bill that will create an economic opportunity for ranchers and farmers, but also set out some goals for how this industry, how agriculture and forestry can be part of the climate solution.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.